Hey there, welcome to Off the Wall. My name is Trey. Thank you so much for joining me today. We've got a lot to get through today with the IFL and the AFL. It's the last week of the season that we'll have both of those going on at the same time. The IFL just wrapped up week 18 this past weekend. Almost have the entire playoff picture set in place. So we'll talk about the IFL week 18 games, some of the results that happened, some of the highlights from those, and then we'll take a look at week 19 and see what is yet to be determined with the IFL playoff picture and what is at stake for some of those teams. And then we have an interview with Arena Insider founder Anthony Carter. Anthony's working on a little docu-series about the arena football season so far in 2024, which is going to premiere a little bit later on this week after the ArenaBowl. So I had a chat with him about the AFL season to this point, about Arena Insider and how he got that started. So had a really good time talking with him about that. And then we'll dive into the AFL championship game preview. We'll talk about the semifinals that took place this past weekend, as well as giving a preview of what's to come with the matchup between the Albany Firebirds and the Billings Outlaws. But before we dive into any of that, please give us a follow on all of our socials on Instagram, Twitter/X, and TikTok at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball, Off the Wall FB on each of those. We'd appreciate a follow on there, and go ahead and drop a like on a couple things that help your boy out. But in addition to that, if you're watching on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up on this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be posting a lot more stuff in the off season. We're have some ideas of some things, not going to commit to anything just yet, but just because the arena and indoor season is coming to a close doesn't mean that the content's going to stop. So we'll have some ideas for some things that we'll post on there. So go ahead and subscribe to that YouTube channel. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate the podcast page. I think if you, I don't know, you can figure out how to get to the podcast page and rate us 5 stars, like the episode, do all that fun stuff, helps us out. So yeah, appreciate all the support so far. We've been building slowly but surely across everything, across all the socials, across the YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So appreciate all your support up to this point and going forward. But let's dive into the IFL Week 18. The first game we're going to talk about is the Green Bay Blizzard at the Jacksonville Sharks, and Green Bay won this game 45-42, so a much closer game than people probably would have thought going into this. Green Bay was 13.5-point favorites heading in, and they ended up winning this game by just 3. So starting with Jacksonville, I've said on multiple episodes of this show over the past couple of months that the way to compete with Green Bay is to run the ball. Their passing defense is top-notch, unbelievable, but their rushing defense leaves a little bit to be desired. And Jacksonville took that ideology and they ran with it, pun intended. From the opening kickoff, they were running the ball, and they were working the clock. They were controlling the pace of the game. Green Bay, what they do is they hop out to a lead and then they force you to pass the ball, and they force you to pass into their strength, which is their secondary. But Jacksonville was able to run the ball effectively. They had a couple drives. I think their first 2 drives were like 4.5 and 6 minutes in length, which is a lifetime in arena and indoor football. So Jacksonville was able to really work it down the field, and they were just very impressive at the line of scrimmage when it came to running the football. And they had over 100 rushing yards total on the day. And quarterback Caleb Barker was efficient through the air as well. He went 11 for 15 for 107 yards and 3 touchdowns. And this is a game where every single drive, except for 2, ended with points for both teams. The only drives that didn't were the one in the second half where Jacksonville was sacked for a safety. That ended up being the game-changing moment for both teams. And then Green Bay kneeled out the clock at the end. So every other drive ended in points leading up to that point. So very good job by Jacksonville. They just ran out of time on this one, and they were able to sustain some long drives. They were able to keep their offense on the field, but unfortunately, they couldn't get a stop on defense when they needed it, and they needed that to give their offense an opportunity to keep up and potentially steal this game away from Green Bay. And for Green Bay, this was a game that they really, really needed to win to stay atop the Eastern Conference. Right now, they're tied with Frisco at 12-3, but they have the edge in terms of in-conference record, which is going to be the tiebreaker if both of those teams end up tied at the end of the season. So they did just enough to hold off this feisty Sharks team. And quarterback Max Mailer, he had another big day. He had 6 total touchdowns on the day with 4 passing and 2 rushing, and really kept things moving. And every Green Bay possession ended in points, and you really can't ask for much more than that. They could have been a little bit more efficient on the ground in terms of running the football, but Jacksonville has a sneaky good defense who's just been put in a ton of bad spots throughout the season, in part due to the offense just being so miserable for the majority of the season. But when you are scoring on every single possession and you have a defense the caliber of Green Bay's, that's you can't ask for much more. That's all you need. The Rafiq Abdul Wahid, he's a defensive lineman. He had himself quite a day, getting 2 sacks, including the safety that ended up being the game changing moment of the game, and 2 tackles for loss and 3.5 total tackles. And they use him in the tush push package where they line him up as like a fullback right behind the quarterback, and they'll snap it to Myler. He'll put his head down, and he'll push him behind and get him into the end zone. So he's providing value on both sides of the ball, and he's just been phenomenal up to this point. I would not be surprised to see him make the All IFL first team at the end of this season. But this Blizzard team is playing really well. But I will say they're gonna have to take it up a notch once the playoff starts if they really want to give themselves the best chance at punching their ticket to the IFL National Championship game in Vegas. If they win next week, they get home field all throughout the playoffs, which would be great and something that works very well in their favor. But they got to elevate their game just a little bit if they want to overcome the team like Frisco and whoever comes out of the West and ultimately take home the national championship. Next game we're going to talk about is the Sioux Falls Storm at the Iowa Barnstormers, and Iowa won this game 65-54. If you were watching this game, there were many moments throughout the game where you would say to yourself like, "Wow, these teams are 3-11, like 4-10, like they look pretty good." But then there were other moments all throughout the game for both sides where you would be like, "Oh, that's right. They're 3-11. They're 4-10. That's why." This is despite how high scoring this was. This is a pretty ugly game across the board. But Iowa came out red hot in this one. They jumped out to a 26-3 lead, and eventually they were leading by as much as 29 in this one. And if you've watched Iowa at any point this season, that's a shocking thing to see them do against anybody. Let like Sioux Falls hasn't had their greatest season. In fact, it's been their worst season. But to still see them do that to a team like Sioux Falls is still shocking. Quarterback Brandon Alt, he ended the day 14 for 29 for 140 yards and 6 touchdowns. But there really wasn't a lot of balance yet again to this offense. It was all passing, hardly any rushing. Collectively, as a team, they had 14 rushes for 18 yards, and that's just not good enough to be balanced and to be very competitive in this league. And that's why they're where they're at record wise. Fortunately for Iowa, they bounced to a big enough lead where some of their shortcomings and some of the lack of balance didn't really matter because they jumped out to such a big lead and they were able to just keep doing what they were doing. But they ended up settling for 5 field goal attempts. Five. They connected on a handful of them, but that just makes you think they scored 65 while settling for field goals 5 times. Imagine what they could have done if instead of settling for a field goal attempt, they punched it in 2 or 3 times for a touchdown. They could have scored even more. They could have potentially broken 80 if they had that balance that I've been preaching about with them. But wide receiver Quan Williams had a massive day as well with 7 catches for 95 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Gabriel Rui at kicker. This guy's a dog. He's great. He had himself a day accounting for 22 points, a kicker by himself accounting for 22 points. He had 3 field goals, 3 deuces, and 7 extra points. He's proven to be an absolute weapon for the Barnstormers, and I would not be surprised to see him on one of the All IFL teams at the end of the season. It's just a matter of which one he's going to make. On the other side, I was in on Storm quarterback Jaya Wright, but I may have been in a little too early. Wright showed some great abilities with his legs against Quad City. He had over 100 yards on the ground, and being able to run the ball with the quarterback is a huge part of the Storm offense and why they have been so successful over the past decade plus is that they implemented that and they were able to weaponize the quarterback on the ground while still getting enough efficiency out of the air. And I anticipated this being a game where they would put it all together just because I didn't think Iowa would pose much of a threat to them. But and if you look at the box score, I technically wasn't wrong. He did account for 7 touchdowns, which on paper is like, oh, 7 touchdowns, that's cool. With 191 passing yards and 10 rushes for 80 yards. But if you watch the game all of that production came in the second half when the game was very much in Iowa's pocket. Like this game was over midway through the third quarter. The lead was just insurmountable for the way Sioux Falls operates as an offense and as a team. But yeah, the Storm offense, they only scored 10 points in the first half, and they just got boat raced early, and it was hard for them to come back. Like I mentioned earlier, Iowa was up by 29 at one point, and that's just too much for Sioux Falls to overcome. And this is going to be a season of what ifs for a lot of teams, but I don't think any team is going to have a bigger what if than Sioux Falls after this season, just based on how everything went down. What if Lorenzo Brown Jr. Was in the offense from week one? What if Billy Hall stuck around for a few more weeks? There's a lot of what ifs with this Sioux Falls team that they're going to look back on this season and be like, what if this happened? What if that happened? But hopefully each of these teams will be able to build off of their end of the season, and they've got some bright spots heading into the end here, and hopefully they'll be able to right the ship and start rebuilding for 2025 so that they can both make a playoff run, because in the East it's anybody's game. All these teams have a shot at it. It's just a matter of getting off to the best start possible. Next game we're going to talk about is the Quad City Steamwheelers at the Tulsa Oilers, and Quad City won this game 35-31. So the mission was simple for Quad City. You win and you're in. That's all they needed to do for the playoffs, and they didn't make it easy on their fans at all with how dramatic this game was. It came down to the very, very last moments. But they got it done thanks to a touchdown by quarterback Mike Irwin with 5 seconds left. He ran it in and took the lead, ultimately giving Tulsa no time to really do anything. But this wasn't a particularly great game for the Steamwheelers offense. They had trouble getting things going early on, and lucky for them, they made some adjustments and came out in the second half, and they scored touchdowns on every single drive in the second half. So every single time that they touched the ball, they scored a touchdown in the second half, which was huge. It's exactly what they needed in this game because, like I said, you win and you're in. Quarterback Judd Erickson, he had 3 total touchdowns, 1 passing and 2 rushing on the day before he got hurt, and Mike Irwin had to come in late. Wide receiver Jared Harrington, he added 1 on the ground as well, and I will always say feed Vander, feed Vander, feed Vander. If you follow me on Twitter/X, I've been posting about that every single time Quad City plays, but they ended up giving the ball to PJ Vander 13 different times, and I will die on the hill saying that they can always give him the ball more and that they will need to continue to give him the ball more now that they're in the playoffs in order to have a chance against a team like Green Bay, who we've talked about. You have to run the ball to have a chance. So let's see if Quad City can do that if they're paired up with Green Bay. But in this game, Quad City needed a win to get into the dance, and they got it. And for Tulsa, I want to start off by giving a shout out to the Tulsa fan base and the culture that they've really developed. IFL does this thing called the fan base. What is it called? The Fan Base Champion Award. It's given to that best home field advantage all throughout the season. And Tulsa's fans have gotten that award 5 times this year. So they've had 18 weeks of the season. Tulsa's gotten it 5 times. So they have developed an unbelievable fan base, an unbelievable culture there. And it's only a matter of time before what's on the field matches what those fans are bringing every single week. So it's a job well done by the front office, job well done by the game ops staff, all the fans that bring it every single game. Tulsa is one of those IFL venues that I really want to go see a game at, and hopefully next year after, they'll have a team that's a little bit more competitive to reward them for the work that they've done off the field. But on offense for the Oilers, this was a similar story to what we saw with the Steamwheelers, where in the first half they were just slow and sloppy and they couldn't get much going. But then they made some adjustments and they started scoring a touchdown on every single drive of the second half. So in the second half, both the Steamwheelers and the Oilers scored touchdowns on every single time that the offense took the field and had possession of the ball. But unfortunately for the Oilers, they just ran out of time. The Steamwheelers scored a touchdown with 5 seconds left on, I believe it was 4th and goal. And Tulsa needed to win this game and then win the next week against the Pirates and have Quad City lose. So it was still technically alive for Tulsa to make the playoffs and leapfrog Quad City, but this was the first step, and they unfortunately couldn't get it done. Quarterback Andre Sale, he had a really strong game, going 20 for 27 for 172 yards and 5 touchdowns. He spread the ball out pretty evenly amongst the receiving core. He got newcomer CJ Tate involved, and he continued to get the ball to Alexis Rosario, who leads the IFL in receptions with one more week to go. So, despite some of the issues that the Tulsa offense has had throughout the season, the fact that they have the leading wide receiver in terms of receptions is pretty impressive. So that's a tip of the cap to what Rosario has done to A, stay healthy, and B, stay efficient and impactful no matter what was going on, no matter who was throwing him the ball. And it was nice to see friend of the show, newly signed Calvin Bundage, who was released by the Pirates a few weeks back. He signed with the Oilers before this game, returned home to his home state of Oklahoma, and he made a big impact in his first game with the team, recording 9 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. And that Oilers defense got to the quarterback 4 times and brought him down for sacks. And again, they just ran out of time in this one, and their playoff chances went up in smoke. They're done. So the playoffs in the East are set at this point. But Tulsa has an interesting matchup against Massachusetts next week, a little Calvin Bundage revenge game, if you will. But yeah, Tulsa's not going to the playoffs. Quad City is going to the playoffs. They're going to snag that final spot. But this Tulsa team was exciting, much improved from last year, but we'll have to see what they can do heading into 2025. Next game we're going to talk about is the San Antonio Gunslingers at the Tucson Sugar Skulls, and San Antonio won this game 49-43. So starting with San Antonio, this offense delivered yet again, but not in the typical way that we've seen all year. Typically, the Gunslingers have been one of the most prolific and efficient passing teams in the league. If you just look at Sam Castranova's stats on the year, you'll see that. He's got 3,100 passing yards, almost 3,200 passing yards, 72 touchdowns on a 68.7% completion percentage. But in this game in particular, they got it done on the ground a lot more than they did through the air, which was a little surprising to see. They ended up getting 5 rushing touchdowns on the day, 4 from Castronova and 1 from Cali Rashad, including a long run by Castronova where he broke free for a big game and he put the Gunslingers up big in the second half. But the best play of the day by far, and potentially the IFL catch of the year, belongs to Nyquan Murray, wide receiver for the San Antonio Gunslingers, who caught a wild one-handed touchdown in the end zone, and he seemed to only have it by his fingertips. He went up and got it, and as he's fallen, he only had it barely by his fingertips. He fell, flipped, maintained possession of the ball, didn't let it touch the ground in the end zone. They initially ruled it an incomplete pass because I'm sure the refs were thinking, like, surely this is not a catch. There's no way he caught that. But they challenged it, they reviewed it, and ended up being ruled as a touchdown. So it was arguably the catch of the year. So we'll have to see where that falls in the rankings at the end of the season. But yeah, this was a pretty solid game by San Antonio. Their defense let Tucson in and gave them a glimmer of hope towards the end. I think San Antonio was up by 20-21 at one point in the second half, but they just slowly let Tucson back in. So on paper, this looks like Tucson was neck and neck with them, but San Antonio was ahead by a large margin for the majority of this game. And for Tucson, they showed some fight getting back into this one, but like I said, it's a little deceptive if you just look at the final score and the box score. They were an onside kick away from potentially stealing this game from San Antonio, but they really have to get the quarterback situation worked out for 2025 if they want to be competitive next year. I went back through all the box scores, and in this game they started their 8th different starting quarterback for the Sugar Skulls this year. 8. They played 15 games. They have 8 different quarterbacks. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a team thing, a culture thing, an interpersonal thing. Something's got to change because you just cannot have that and expect to be a competitive franchise at this level of indoor or arena football. You just can't have that. So quarterback Vincent Espinoza, he didn't play badly. He was thrown into a position where didn't really have a ton of time to get totally acclimated with his team, but he wasn't put in the best position to lead the team to victory. He ended up the day with 5 total touchdowns, and 4 of them were passing, 1 of them was rushing. But Tucson as a whole lucked out, especially in the second half. They got a lot of short fields to work with where they got the ball at the 20 or 25 to start their drive and only had 25 more yards to go to get into the end zone. So they kind of lucked out in terms of scoring late to make this one look closer than it was. But going through 8 quarterbacks in a single season like that, it's got to be some type of record. I don't know. I don't know how we would even fact check that other than just continuously checking box scores. But the offense looked promising at the beginning of the year, but lacking any sort of consistency or continuity on offense, specifically at the quarterback position. You're just setting yourselves up for disaster. So here's to hoping they get some consistency at quarterback in 2025 and they can get things going on the right foot. Next game we're going to talk about is the Vegas Nighthawks at the Northern Arizona Wranglers, and Vegas won this game 55-45. So very high scoring game between these two West teams. And going into this week, this is my game of the week just because these two offenses were very high scoring, very high octane, and both have the potential to drop 60 on any given week. And both of them came pretty close to doing that. Vegas won. They made the playoffs. This game locked them into the playoffs. If Northern Arizona had won, they wouldn't have locked into the playoffs, but they would have had a very, very good chance of making it. So Northern Arizona has their work cut out for them. Next week, they need to win and get a little bit of help in order to sneak into the playoffs. But Vegas locked in their playoff berth, their first in franchise history, with the win this week. So Vegas ended up getting the win, largely thanks to Jerome Johnson's near perfect day. Johnson passing the ball, he went 12 for 15, 152 passing yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. And then on the ground, he added a casual 100 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. So 7 total touchdowns on the day for Johnson. He was very dynamic. He didn't make any costly mistakes. He kept plays alive. He made something out of nothing a handful of times. And he ultimately put the team on his back to get their ticket to the playoffs punched. And the national championship is in Vegas, so they have the opportunity to potentially play for the national championship in their home arena, which is an always interesting storyline and always interesting little variable to throw in there. But it's still very up in the air of what seed Vegas will be, who they'll play. They potentially could have a home game in that first round. They might play Bay Area in the first. It just depends on how next week goes. But they're in the playoffs. That's what we do know. Vegas's defense also had a bit of a bounce back game here as well, coming up with an interception, a blocked field goal, forcing another missed field goal, and then a turnover on downs to end the game. So that's four different stops there. And the combination of the defense getting those types of stops, plus Jerome Johnson getting back to his early season form, has Vegas looking like they're getting things figured out at the perfect time. So this was the Vegas team that we saw early on that went 7-0 and was just blowing the doors off of teams. So the fact that they're getting back to their old ways right before the playoffs, that's good for Vegas. And that's good for the IFL. And on the other side, the Wranglers fought and clawed to keep up with Vegas, and they had a chance to get back in this game, but they just made a couple too many mistakes that ended up setting them back, including the interception, missed field goal. They really lacked a balanced rushing attack in this one too. That's been something I've been talking about for a while now with this Northern Arizona team, is that a lot of their offense flows through the quarterback, which as it should. Most offenses in the IFL do. But the majority of the rushing yards are coming from Joshua Jones consistently almost every single game. This game was no different. They had 94 total rushing yards on the ground, which is pretty good, all things considered. But Joshua Jones accounted for 77 of them by himself. And so that leaves 17 remaining rushing yards for the rest of the team. And that'd be different if they were only giving the ball to like 2 or 3 other players. But they ended up having 4 or 5 other players that had rushing attempts on the day, and they only got 17 total yards. So it was pointed out on the broadcast by the commentary team for the Wranglers that they don't have a true running back on the roster, which I thought was an interesting way to approach their roster management and their personnel. Being that it is such a pass heavy game, indoor and arena is, specifically with the IFL, you really got to be able to run the ball to be efficient. And the fact that they don't have a true running back that they can really lean on in 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 situations, I think is kind of holding this offense back from reaching their fullest potential. They interchange the wide receiver. They sometimes put the wide receivers at the running back slot, but it's just different having a true natural running back at that spot versus having somebody who's used to playing wide receiver filling in at that spot. It's just different. And I think if Northern Arizona is able to retain Joshua Jones next year and get him a true running back next to him, that's going to be the thing that is missing for this offense. And I feel like by this point in the season, they probably have a playoff spot locked in if that was the case. But I appreciate that Northern Arizona gave it a shot. It was an interesting approach, and it's worked for the most part. But I just have a feeling that they're going to be the odd man looking out when it comes to the playoffs and what that finally looks like when all the dust settles here after next week. But they have a chance to make the playoffs, but they need to win and get a lot of help. And I'm just not sure if they'll be able to do it. And the last game of the weekend was the Duke City Gladiators at the Bay Area Panthers, and Bay Area won this game 50-28. So coming off of a crazy ending last week against Northern Arizona, you just got the feeling that Bay Area was going to come in. They were going to be locked in, dialed in, and they were just going to smack around Duke City and get back to their true form. And they certainly did that, especially on defense, but this was a much closer game in the first half than you would think. Like a lot of Duke City games this year, especially the earlier matchup with Bay Area, they weren't able to make any adjustments in the second half and keep up with the adjustments that the other team was making. Duke City came out, and this was a 23-20 game at the half. Duke City was only down by 3, but it just became unraveled, and they ended up losing by 22 as Bay Area made adjustments and pulled away, and Duke City wasn't able to do the same. Quarterback Hassan Rogers, he had a tough outing. I'm a big Hassan Rogers guy, but this wasn't his best game. But their backup, Javon Kilgo, he didn't do much better when he entered the game. I think combined, they went 15 for 35 for 143 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, which it's just not going to be enough to defeat the defending champions of the IFL. It's just not. Wide receiver Tamorian Terry, he had a very good game. He reeled in 6 catches for 92 yards and 2 touchdowns, but we didn't see as much production elsewhere, and we didn't see as much consistency elsewhere. They're still fighting every week, which I guess is pretty good, and all we can really want out of a team that's sitting at 2-13 with one more game to go. And on the other side, this Bay Area defense is playing unbelievably well. They are just playing lights out, especially in that secondary. They're making it difficult for teams to pass the ball. And looking at the combined total of pass breakups on the day, the secondary for Bay Area had 12 total. So 12 different times they had a DB break up a pass and just disrupt the flow of what Duke City was trying to do. And when you combine that with the offense being efficient and patient, especially when they run the ball, Shane Simpson, he turned in a 3 rushing touchdown performance, and quarterback Daquan Neal, he had a pretty efficient day through the air, going 12 for 14 for 136 yards and 3 touchdowns. He did have an interception, but it didn't end up making much of a difference at the end of the game. But watching how this Bay Area team operated during the game, they seem like the perfect antithesis of the remaining playoff teams in the West. When you think about the other playoff teams in the West, they're high powered, they're willing to get into shootouts, they're willing to say, oh, you can score 55, we'll score 60. But that's not really how Bay Area operates. They're more of the traditional outdoor mentality of running the football very well, playing great defense, and picking your spots to get big plays through the air. So I feel like them securing home field advantage throughout all the playoffs up until the championship game is great for them. It would be great for anybody, but especially with how they play ball and how they approach their game plan every single week and how they execute their game plan every single week. It'll be interesting to see how they approach their last game of the season, being that they have home field locked up. They don't really have much to play for, but they're playing against San Diego, who does have something to play for. They could potentially host a playoff game if they win next week against Bay Area. So it'll be interesting to see how Bay Area approaches next week. Is it going to be a rest versus rust situation where they rest a few people and keep them healthy, or do they just let them go and keep it going? But yeah, Bay Area rolled in this one, and there's a reason why they're the number 1 seed in the West. So that was IFL Week 18. Had a couple of teams punch their ticket to the playoffs, Quad City and Vegas. So congratulations to both of them. We still have one playoff spot up for grabs. It's going to be between the Arizona Rattlers and the Northern Arizona Wranglers. They don't play each other this week, but we'll dive into who they do play when we do our preview in Well, right now. So, first game of the IFL Week 19 is going to be Massachusetts at Tulsa. This game doesn't really have, well, I guess it does. I was going to say it doesn't really have any playoff implications, but if Massachusetts loses this game and Quad City wins their game, Quad City could potentially leapfrog Massachusetts into that 3 spot. So, if Tulsa had won this past weekend, if Tulsa wins this game, they're one step closer, but Tulsa's out. The only thing that this could impact is the seeding for Massachusetts. So I would expect Massachusetts to be the favorite in this one, probably like a 6.5, 7 point favorite heading in, just because they haven't been at their sharpest over this back half of the season. But this is going to be an interesting revenge game for Calvin Bundage, who played for the Pirates for a couple of years, was released a few weeks back, and now is playing for the Oilers. So this is going to be a must-watch game on Friday night. In terms of a total for Pirates and Oilers, I would guess this is probably going to be in the high 80s, like an 88 and a half, 89 and a half, somewhere in that range. Hopefully Massachusetts will be able to get their offense in order. That way, heading into the playoffs, they're in the best position possible. But yeah, Massachusetts is going to be the favorite in this one, but it's going to be very interesting to see how the Oilers come out swinging. Kicking off the Saturday slate of games, we've got the Arizona Rattlers at the San Antonio Gunslingers. If Arizona wins this game, they're in the playoffs. So it's going to be a very important game for them. They're probably going to be the favorite in this one, probably looking at a 7.5, 8 point favorite. San Antonio doesn't have any playoff implications to play for, but stat wise, I feel like they're going to be going for something. So Sam Casanova, quarterback for San Antonio, he's sitting at 72 passing touchdowns on the year, which is nuts, and 22 rushing touchdowns on the year. So that's 94 total. I feel like San Antonio is going to do everything that they can to get him over that 100 mark, just because that would be quite an achievement and something that they can hang their hat on going into 2025. But I would expect Arizona to be that, like I said, 7.5, 8 point favorite. This game's probably going to be very high scoring, at least on the total. So I would anticipate this one probably being in the hundreds, probably like a 102.5, 103.5, somewhere in that range, just because we know San Antonio can score a ton of points and they can also give up a ton of points. So this one's going to be a very entertaining game and probably the most entertaining game of the time slot that they're in. And in that same time slot, we've got the Quad City Steamwheelers at the Jacksonville Sharks. Quad City has some seeding to play for, but they're for sure in the playoffs. Jacksonville is out, but Quad City probably going to be the favorite in this one, probably like a 4.5, 5 point favorite going into Jacksonville in this one. But Jacksonville has proven to be sneaky good over the past couple of weeks with their switch to Caleb Barker. And last week they gave Green Bay a little bit of a scare. So I would not be surprised to see Jacksonville pull off the upset here. In terms of a total, probably looking at a mid 80s, probably like an 85, 86, just because Quad City's offense doesn't score the most points in the world, especially on the road, but their defense usually plays pretty well. So I would expect this one to be a low scoring game with Quad City being the one score favorite. Next game we've got is the Green Bay Blizzard at the Sioux Falls Storm. This game's kicking off at 7:05 Central. Green Bay needs to win this game in order to secure home field advantage throughout the playoffs, and they know it. So they're probably going to come in and put a hurting on Sioux Falls, who's down at the bottom of the standings right now in the Eastern Conference. Probably looking at another double-digit spread in favor of Green Bay. Probably looking at another minus 13.5, minus 14.5. Especially that defense going up against the young and inexperienced Jaya Wright. I think he'll do pretty well if he can get something established on the ground early on. Total wise, probably looking at something in the low 90s, like a 91.5, 92.5. But I would expect Green Bay to absolutely roll in this one and end up securing that home field advantage all throughout the playoffs. Next game we've got is the Iowa Barnstormers at the Frisco Fighters. So Frisco is still battling for seeding. They've secured a home playoff game, but they have a chance to get home field all throughout the playoffs. They need to win and they need Green Bay to lose in order to make that happen. And both of these games are happening at the same time, so they're going to have to be careful not to do any scoreboard watching and just focus on the game that they have. Just because we saw last week, Iowa can be a little bit dangerous. They dropped 65 and probably could have dropped more. But again, that was against a very different team versus what Frisco's going to bring to the table. And something exciting for Frisco is that Eli Mack, who's been very popular in the YouTube chat and in the YouTube world, I think he has some like 800,000 YouTube subscribers on his channel. He's been a member of the Frisco Fighters, but hasn't seen the field just yet. He was told by his coach late last week that he's going to get some playtime this week. So I would anticipate that YouTube chat to be quite quite busy with some of the fans from Eli Mack, but I would expect Frisco to be a double-digit favorite in this one, at least like a minus 11, minus 11 and a half, somewhere in that range, with an over/under probably 93 and a half, 94 and a half, just coming off of a high-scoring game for Iowa and coming off of Frisco dropping 80 a few weeks back. So this is probably going to be in the mid 90s, but I would anticipate Frisco putting the clamps on Iowa and running away with this one. Then next up, we've got one of my favorite matchups in all the IFL. It's the California Clash. It's the Bay Area Panthers at the San Diego Strike Force, kicking off at 8:05 Central. I would anticipate Bay Area being the favorite in this one just because they are the number one seed in the Western Conference. But I'm very curious how they're going to approach this. Are they gonna rest Shane Simpson? Are they going to rest Daquan Neal? Being that the roster sizes are what they are, you can only rest so many people. So do you rest anybody? If so, who do you rest? So it'll be interesting to see what they do, and we'll see what we can find out leading up to the game. But I would anticipate the odds being in favor of Bay Area in this one, even though San Diego needs the win in order to lock in a home playoff game. So I would anticipate this over under probably going to be in the high 90s, probably like a 97 and a half, 98 and a half. But these games, we've seen some high scoring ones, we've seen some low scoring ones between these two teams. But there's one thing we do know: this is going to be a great game. Whether it's 60 to 65, 32 to 33, it's going to be phenomenal. It's going to be great. So if you're going to watch any game this weekend, make sure you're watching the fourth Cali Clash of the season here. The last game of the Saturday slate is going to be the Tucson Sugar Skulls at the Vegas Nighthawks, also kicking off at 8:05. Vegas can potentially get a home playoff game if they win and San Diego loses. So both these games happening at the same time as well. Vegas will have to be careful not to do any scoreboard watching, just because we saw Tucson last week. They have a chance to sneak up on you and make it a little bit more of a game than you may realize. But I think Vegas is going to have revenge in mind. Tucson was the team that ended their undefeated season early in the year, and Tucson only has 2 wins on the year, and one of them is against Vegas. So I'm sure Vegas is not too thrilled about that. They're going to want to make a statement, especially heading into the playoffs. So I would anticipate Vegas probably being like a 11 and a half, 12 and a half point favorite, at least double digits in this one, and over under probably looking at a low to mid 90s, like a 93 and a half, because I think Vegas can do their part. Do we know that Tucson can do theirs? And then the last game of the IFL regular season, I can't believe I'm saying that after 19 weeks, is going to be the Northern Arizona Wranglers at the Duke City Gladiators. This game is going to kick off on Sunday at 4:05 Central. So Northern Arizona needs to win this game, and they need a little bit of help. So they need to be San Antonio fans from the game in the day prior. So they need San Antonio to win, and Northern Arizona needs to win this game against Duke City in order to sneak into the playoffs. So we'll see how that works out for them. But Northern Arizona should be able to handle Duke City in this one. If Northern Arizona comes in and plays their game and executes their game plan, they should be like 8.5, 9.5 point favorites heading into this one, with an over under total, probably looking at a high 80s, maybe like an 87 and a half, 88 and a half in that range. On Duke City's side, I would imagine you see a little bit of both quarterbacks again this week, like we've seen over the past couple of weeks. Give them both like an open audition, whether that's for the quarterback role at Duke City or elsewhere in the future. But with them sitting at 2-13, I would just expect to see as many people hitting the field as possible. So that's IFL Week 19, the last slate of the IFL regular season. 8 of these teams will be moving forward in the IFL playoffs. While this will be the last time we see 8 of these teams playing this season until March of 2025, when the 2025 season kicks off. So it'll be a very interesting week. It's kind of funny how the schedule worked out, where the teams that need to be scoreboard watching are playing at the same time as each other. And the schedule's staggered very nicely. And so IFL is probably very happy with the way it worked out. But this should be a very, very fun weekend of games with a bunch of storylines to look out for. And if you're going to watch any game, Bay Area, San Diego is going to be a great one. And then Arizona, San Antonio. Those two are going to be the ones I would highly suggest watching. So that was talk about the IFL. We'll pivot over to the AFL, and we'll talk with our friend Anthony Carter from Arena Insider. We got Anthony on the show. We were able to talk about the beginnings of Arena Insider, this 2024 AFL season so far, and dig into some of the things that Arena Insider and Anthony are working on behind the scenes and what we can expect to see from them moving forward. So I'm not going to waste any more time here. Here's me and Anthony. All right, joining us on the show today, we've got the founder of X1 Media and Arena Insider. He's putting together a little docu-series on the less than ideal launch of the 2024 AFL season titled X1 Investigates the Turbulent Revival of the Arena Football League. And he's going to be at ArenaBowl XXXIII this Friday at the American Dream Mall in New Jersey. Folks, welcome Anthony Carter to the show. Anthony, thanks for joining. How are you today?
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
For those that don't know, tell us about Arena Insider, how it got started, and what inspired you to make it happen.
sure. Yeah, it started as Philadelphia Soul Insider in about 2014. That's when I was first getting involved with AFL, and I live in Philly, so the Soul were the closest team. And that was at the time the league had about 12 teams, and after that season, a lot of teams left. They went down. I believe it was down to 8 teams. So I was like, might as well just to cover all the teams, and
Right.
so that's how Arena Insider started later that year. And so going about 10 years strong now. And yeah, just been everywhere, covered all playoff games and different leagues coming back, folded, new teams, profiles, all the above. So that's
Yeah.
really how it got started.
It's funny, the 8 teams when you started, and then this year it ended up being 8 teams again. So it was
Yeah, it's
pretty full
crazy. It went
cycle.
from it went from about 12 to 8 to 4, or I think to 6, and
Uh,
then just none at all. Or I think it went to 4, something like that, just none
yeah.
at all. And then come back with 16, now it's down to 8. It's just crazy. So
Yeah, it's like,
seen
man,
it all.
let's start small and build up instead of
Sure.
having big time dreams and getting crushed in the process like we have been, right?
Right, exactly.
What was your first introduction to arena football?
I've always attended soul games, never as a journalist, just as a fan.
Mhm.
So I just loved watching real football. Always went to a game, and more when I started getting into sports writing before I went to school. That's when I reached out. Shout out Tom Goodhines, who was the former GM of the Soul at the time. He was the one that credentialed me to cover the team. I think that was like my first like credential media as a credential media, and so
Nice.
I just seen how that just built up, and just I studied it over the years, and just watched a lot and looked at, just talked to different players, everything. And yeah, so when the league shut down in 2019 and then they want to start back up again, I was like, why not? Why not start it back up? Because I
Right.
seen how
Yeah.
much it was building and following. So
Yeah.
um yeah, it's just something I love to do on the side. It's something I independent. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing where you've been going at this for quite a while. Like you didn't just start up earlier this year like some folks like this guy. You've been at this for a minute, and so it's nice to see that somebody who's got some continuity in the league. Continuity in this league are not things that often go together. So it was nice to see something.
yeah, and it's cool when you cover a player and then next thing you know you see them in the NFL or something like
Yeah.
that. It's happened a
Yeah.
couple times, and or they just move into like a managing role for another
Right.
team, or so that's always cool too. It's kind of like a good benefit, just as a journalist. Like I was telling you, I posted on my Twitter earlier when I was looking at my old files. I actually have a photo, young Anthony. I was about 16 years old, and
Okay.
it was me interviewing Emery Salmons, who's still playing for the Philadelphia Soul and kind of
Wow.
working behind the scenes. So it's just crazy to
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
I sent it to him. I didn't hear back yet, but so yeah, I'm sure he knows.
Yeah.
But just him and a lot of guys still in the league that that's still playing that I remember covering.
Right.
Darius Prince, for an example. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was cool to see.
Yeah, it's so funny to think about. Like, yeah, 2016. That was 8 years ago. It was only 8 years, but also 8 years is also a lot at the same time. It kind of puts your brain in a pretzel a little bit.
Right, exactly.
So something I really admire about what you've done with Arena Insider is that so far this season, your willingness to dive into some of the not so fun stuff that's happened. A lot of talking heads and historians in the arena football world, they were radio silent when some of the things got a little dicey there, and some of the turbulence at the beginning of the year. But you were speaking up and giving a voice to some of the players and coaches that, quite frankly, they were going through it. And so, growing up, watching and rooting for the Soul and seeing how that situation went down earlier this year, that had to be tough. Walk us through how you started to hear about the situation and how that went down.
Yeah, and you're right. I think that's one of the things that I had to kind of do a shift with how I reported with Arena Insider because it was kind of like the similar like all the player profile things like that,
Mhm.
and that's why I was building up the site when it was coming back. And initially going into the season, I noticed no one from the league was getting back to me. A lot of the teams appeared rushed or they didn't have a website fully. There was no promotion, and it was a lot of different red flags that as a former reporter and as a current PR specialist, I noticed. I'm like, this seems unusual. So yes, I was just doing that. And really, as we're a couple days in before the season start, I still saw no promo and nothing was going on.
Mhm.
Then I started getting a couple of texts from some soul players that were explaining the situation. And for people who may not know, just to break it down quickly, but the Philadelphia Soul, they were scheduled to play against Louisiana Food. It was the first game of the season. They were they some of the players went down to Louisiana. I think they flew into New Orleans so they could go to Lake Charles. I know it was a while ago. It seems like a while ago, but not that long ago.
Right?
So I'm trying to remember
Yeah, it was only
parts
10
and
weeks
bits.
ago, but it feels like
Only 10
years.
weeks ago. It's crazy. It does. And so
Yeah.
a lot of the players they stayed in a team motel, and apparently that motel's bill wasn't paid for. The motel was kind of looking out for the players in good faith, thinking that the payment was going to come. But then it got to a point where there's no money. There's only so much we can do. So they had to kick the players out, held the belongings, and eventually police came in. From what a few of the players told me, police came in, was able to get them to retrieve the belongings. And then at that same day, so this was on the Friday, I believe the Soul played on a Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, Saturday or Sunday.
Mhm.
So all this happened down on a Friday, a couple days before the game, and the players were received termination papers and just kicked off the team. So the league hired an AAL two team to play for the Soul. I'm sure we saw how all that unfolded,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it was just strange. And as all this is going down, of course, the head coach also suddenly resigned, Pat Pimmel. No one
Mhm.
knew why. So all this was going down, and I'm getting all this information, and I got no response from the league. Or it was just, I would see the league post like, game one starts this weekend, the first game, we're back. And I'm like, yeah, this huge elephant in
Are
the
we?
room.
Are we back?
It was, and I'm scanning around and I saw none of the other blogs that cover the league for years,
Mhm.
probably just as long as I have. Nobody reported on it. No one acknowledged it. So I think for me as a journalist, it allowed me to kind of take it a step further. And I put out a tweet saying that because of the situation going on with the Philadelphia Soul and potentially other teams, so Louisiana started to have some troubles brewing
Yeah.
there. I said, we're not going to focus on any game recaps or any player profile because we need to look into the situation because we have to be fair. And
Mhm.
I'm not truly, I'm just telling the story, right? And the
Yeah.
story has to get out there and it's a situation and it's being ignored. I mean, we can say that it was being ignored.
It
So,
was. Yeah.
yeah. And I've just felt like I had to take a step up as a journalist and for me and the company to just dive into it. I didn't expect it to keep snowballing down, but
Yeah. I don't think anybody did.
no, exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's just how all that just happened. And
Yeah, and I know
here we
you
are.
got some grief from some folks being like, "Oh, he only reports bad news. He's the Grim Reaper." It's like, man, if only bad stuff is happening, that's what do you want me to do? Like, I'm just telling you exactly what's going on.
And was what as someone that's worked in TV news in very southern I worked in Southern Oregon, so
Mhm.
very, everyone's critical of the news and
Right.
journalists.
Oh yeah.
I've seen it all, I've gotten it all. So comments like that doesn't surprise me. But what's interesting about it though is that, it's people are anti-media. But what's interesting about that though is that they're busy attacking me, what we were doing, rather than criticizing league officials and what
Right.
was actually bringing attention to those issues. So when I saw that, I said, okay, clearly we're doing something right because we're
Yep.
reporting on what's going on.
Uh-huh.
And if 16 teams started the league and it's down to 8, how can you expect to have more positive news than negative news?
Yeah.
So, and then you got people accusing and saying they're not getting paid, conditions,
Yeah.
refs not getting paid. How can you expect? That's essentially saying let's just ignore it and let's just focus on everything else going on.
Yeah.
So I took that and I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. If you're one to ignore it, you're basically saying it's okay. That's fine.
Yeah,
And in
and
reality, that's not fine on any level. Like we
no,
should be calling this out. We should be blowing the whistle on it.
you have to,
Yeah.
or else, and let's just be honest. If it wasn't for, and I'm just gonna say, if it wasn't for Arena's side, it wasn't for your blog site, it wasn't for everybody else calling out the league, this probably would have still been going on. Like
Yeah.
Commissioner Hutton likely would have still been commissioner, and everything the league may not have been. They probably would have suspended halfway through, or it would have kept going, and
Yeah.
essentially all this would have still been going out. So you can see the power of people speaking up about the
Yeah.
issues. It was a serious thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So speaking on the docuseries, X1
Hmm.
investigates the turbulent revival of the Arena Football League. Going back and reviewing all these interviews and kind of piecing everything together in hindsight, was there anything that stood out the most to you? Like, was there anything that was like, wow, we should have seen this coming based on A, B, and C? Like, was there any of those moments?
I think a lot of this is still, believe it or not, I'm still even going through a lot of the parts because I'm still finding out new information. One thing I
Hmm.
think people can see on the doc, Louisiana voodoo in that situation where
Hmm.
I kind of knew about it, but it was also I didn't read much into it until really a couple of days ago. How the AFL owed one of the venues money and the city money based on a deal. So that kind of stood out to me where that should have been flagged. And I remember before the season started, I tweeted, I said, the AFL should really put a pause on this upcoming season because there was a lot of inconsistencies.
Hmm.
Everything seemed rushed. No one seemed prepared. And then you see all this happen, and it's just like, so
Yeah.
yeah, I think just a lot of what Steven Titus said. And I really think most recently Zach Bug, I think that elevated for me to tell the story even more. I think
Hmm.
what Zach Bug said, I think there was a lot to it. And I think he definitely sounded the alarm on the future of the
Oh
AFL.
yeah.
And I think something like that shouldn't be ignored. Everything that he said, I think it's something we got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the other indoor and arena leagues, and indoor and arena football. It's a tough business for anybody to survive for very long. And you look at some of the other leagues, and it's like some of these teams, especially expansion teams, they take years to develop. Like you can't just 6 months throw some jerseys on some people and get them out there. And it's like there are so many more things behind the scenes that need to be done. And then how many expansion teams were there in this league? Like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
That's a lot of brand new stuff that you're having to go through. That is, and again, in hindsight, you look back, you're like, that really wasn't going to happen. But in the moment, it's exciting. You're like, AFL's back, yay! And I
Yeah.
feel like that's where a lot of people were.
And I think so. Things. Earlier, I was just reviewing when the AFL filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy initially in
Hmm.
2019, just seeing how much money was owed back to those cities and back to those teams. Like it was a lot, talking hundreds of thousands.
Oh yeah,
And at this time, there's 6 teams. So all that really adds up. And I'm like, wow, I didn't realize how much. I'm
yeah,
not including that part in the doc because that I
yeah.
would need a lawyer to look that over for me.
Yeah, just to make
I don't
sure.
have
Yeah.
the brain power to do all that. But there was that, and it just crossed my mind the other issue that was shocked. Oh, Kayvon Thibodeau when he was
Hmm.
announced as one of the owners for the Black Bears, and I noticed he never said anything about it, never any involvement. So I just
Hmm.
DM'd him. I said, "Hey, are you still the owner?" And he said, "I never was. I was never part of the league. They just used my name for publicity."
That's crazy.
It's
He
like
never came out and said something.
it's and then when you look back on the original press release, he never had a quote in the press release. It was
Yep, yep.
Lee Hutton. And now when I saw that, I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And
Yeah,
so, but these are all issues that is just not being elevated. I don't think louder than it should be.
yeah.
So I think that's really just the reason why I wanted to put this together and include as much as I can. It's too much that I don't know if I can include everything, but
Right. Yeah.
do what I can.
Yeah. Break it up into bite-sized pieces for us.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy.
So despite the brutal, and I cannot emphasize the word brutal enough, start
Sure.
to the season, it hasn't been all bad with AFL this year. There's been some really great games. We've got some really good teams, especially since Jeff Fisher took over. What are some positive things that you've seen with the league, maybe since the beginning, that have changed, and what are your thoughts on where the league is at heading forward?
No, I think that's a great point. I think G6 stepping in, I think they stepped in at a perfect time. I know I haven't been as critical of G6 only because of the situation, and I feel like it's just something that's going to take time considering
Yeah.
just where they're just bringing the league back. So I'm not. A lot of this is on arena football management, so I do want to be clear about that when we talk
Yeah.
about the league. But it's amazing, really, just the turnaround from hiring everyone and then getting AFL back on CBS Sports Network. And when I was doing some of the game recaps, I went on the AFL's website and I saw the stats live, like the
Hmm.
yards and completions, and I'm like blown away. I'm like, I can do a
Yeah.
recap. So
Yeah. Right.
it was great, and I'm like, wow, it's a good turnaround. So I'm glad the new ownership did that. I think getting it on CBS Sports Network for the playoffs, I think that was perfect because that's essentially what it's for. Is for the players and the coaches to get
Yeah.
recognized and get on that big stage. And so yeah, I think just doing all that, the TV deals, and finding a way to manage the boat, like the because it was pretty rocky. So
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure.
and and sure, I don't even think we're out the clear yet, but
Right.
I think all of that they've been doing really just in the last couple of weeks or so has been promising, and the games have been competitive, and there's just been some good games, and
Yeah.
they're being televised too.
Yeah, the stat thing I cannot emphasize enough. Like
It's amazing.
early on, I had like a sticky note, and I was watching the games, and I was like, "All right, Darius Prince, one, two." Like that's how I was doing some of this because I needed the content like to review. Like the first couple of AFL weeks, you go back, I'm like, they caught some touchdowns and they scored.
That's
On to the
it.
next. So I was like, man, I want to talk more in depth, but I can't.
I remember, I forget who recorded this, but they were recording the game live or giving live updates. It was an account. And I think they were at a voodoo game, if I'm not mistaken. But they
Was it the guy
were,
who was like front row?
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
And
was
he was giving
Minnesota
live
Myth versus
updates.
Philly. Yeah, Myth
Okay.
and
That's what
Philly.
it
That's what it
was.
was. Yeah,
Okay. I
yeah.
was like, wow, that's amazing. Like the people would come through. And then I was on Facebook one time and I watched a little bit of a Facebook Live of the voodoo game, that first game of the season. I'm like, this is
Hmm.
crazy. So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
anything we can. So
yeah.
shout
We're
out to
having a
those people for doing
yeah,
that.
100%. We had boots on the ground. This was a 100% crowdsourcing effort. We are like, is anybody
Seriously.
at the game? Please help. We need to know what's happening.
Seriously.
Yeah. So we've got the Arena Bowl this Friday. Going to be the number
Hmm.
one seed Billings Outlaws versus the number two seed Albany Firebirds. Two teams that many expected to meet again after their game in a few weeks back. What are you most excited about for the game, and what do you think people can expect from the game itself?
Yeah, I think this is exactly what the AFL community and I think the league wanted, was the top two teams battling out on a big stage just outside of New York City, right? And
Hmm.
so I think you got a battle of offense versus defense with Albany offense, Billings defense. And I truly don't know. I've been going back and forth who I think will win. Um
Right,
part of me thinks Albany because of the experience, and I think they're playing with just more fire right now from what I'm
right.
seeing. There was a close game on Saturday. I can't remember who they played. Was it Salina? They played
Yeah,
Salina
Salina.
on.
Yep.
They Salina had them. It was a very close game back
Oh
and
yeah.
forth. And at halftime, I was like, okay, go either way. And then Albany just went off, and I checked
Yeah.
the score, and I didn't realize they just put up 80 that fast.
Yep. Yep.
Then you have on the flip side, Billings, Nashville gave them a good fight late in the game, but Billings held on. So I think this is going to be a good game. And I think this is one of those games. I know it sounds cliche, but I think it's one of those games of who is going to be best at protecting the football
Yeah.
and not giving up turnovers. I think that'll determine a winner. But I think Albany will get the slight edge because of the experience, and they kind of have home field advantage a little bit.
It is.
So
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
so
It's
yeah,
was a couple, what, 3-4 hour drive?
from Albany to
Maybe a little bit
maybe
longer than
I
that.
know from here to Albany because I've gone there before. It's
Uh-huh.
about a good 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
So
So
I want to say it's about around that. I would think.
regardless, it's closer than Billings, 100%.
Oh yeah. I don't think many are flying from Montana to go to
No,
Jersey.
no,
So
no.
it might be some. I
There
don't
might be,
know,
yeah, there
but
might be
yeah.
some diehards. I hope
But
the Billings
I
super
think
fan
there's
with
gonna be a
the
lot of Firebirds.
yeah, I hope the
Yeah,
Billings
right.
super fan with the
Get on the
mohawk. I
bus,
hope
the
he's
team
there
bus.
at least. Like let's start a GoFundMe. Let's get him out there.
Sure.
We need him. We need him there.
Get them out there.
Yeah, yeah.
they
I'm
they they should probably start hitting the road now.
yeah, exactly. They might get there just in time for kickoff. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Albany is just on offense. They are unbelievable. Damon Ware's been calling a great game over the past not just the past couple weeks, this entire season with that offense.
Mhm.
But there's something to be said about what Cedric Walker's doing with that Billings
Yeah.
team and the defense that they've been playing all year. And some of the argument you hear is, well, Billings hasn't played anybody, but then Albany has played some of the better teams. In a way, it's kind of SEC Big Ten-ish. When you think
I
about it,
could
it's
see
like
that.
Albany being that SEC team that they've played the best of the best, Billings being that Big Ten team that plays great defense but just crushes everyone they play. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and it's funny how no matter what level of football you watch, there's the same dynamics at play.
Hmm.
It's all the same.
Yeah, and I think the X factor is going to be Darius Prince in that, and I'm
Yeah.
curious how if Outlaws just double him or something. I know it's kind of crazy to double for
Yeah.
indoor, but I mean, you might
That's
have
what you
to
got.
because
Yeah, you might have
he's
to.
been on a man on a mission this season.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna do some rapid fire questions for you. I'll shoot you a question. Give me the first
Okay.
thing that comes to your mind. All right.
Uh-oh. All right.
All right.
Let's do this.
So we got all-time favorite Philly soul player.
Ooh, all time. Oh, rapid fire. So I got to quit. Tiger Jones.
Okay. All-time favorite non-Philly soul AFL player.
Non-Philly Soul. Uh, oh, come back to me on that one. I'll
Okay,
think of
we'll skip
something.
it. Old team from the old AFL that you hope comes back in the future.
I would really hope. I would like Georgia Force. I think if they could
Yeah.
find a way to get that together. Yeah, Georgia
Right.
Force.
Yeah, the whole that area, it's a shame they couldn't get it done just because the Atlanta metro area, it dwarfs almost every other market in the entire AFL. So you would think they'd be able to get
Absolutely.
that figured out. But yeah, I agree with
Yes.
you. I love that one.
Yes.
YouTube or Vire?
Vire all day. No,
Vire.
YouTube.
All right. Minnesota lawyer or former NFL head coach?
Oh man, former NFL head coach.
Okay. Okay.
Not naming
And
anybody
yeah,
specific.
just in general, just general jobs.
Sure.
And then I knew you wouldn't give us a score prediction. So the last one is score prediction for Albany Billings. What do you think?
Oh man, I'm gonna say I don't think it's gonna be high scoring, at least for arena football. So I'll
Right.
say Albany 41, Billings 38.
Okay. Close one.
That's
Let's go.
semi. Yeah, yeah. I think
Yeah.
that'll be
So
close.
let's circle back to the one you skipped.
Oh,
All-time favorite
okay. Let's see.
non-Philly soul AFL player.
I would say Ryan McDaniel, but he plays some. Ryan McDaniel did play for the Soul, but then he went to another team. So
Okay.
I
We
don't know
count
if
it.
that counts, but we'll
Yeah,
we'll count it. I
we'll count
like
it.
Ryan McDaniel.
We'll count it.
Yeah.
What's next for Arena Insider and what can people expect to see in the future?
Right now, just getting through the season, I think, and seeing where this goes. Of course, make sure that documentary goes out, and I'm still gonna push as many stories as I can as I learn
Right.
more. I think it'll be a very active couple of months when you hear a lot of teams and players hint at lawsuits. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the news cycle will stop there. So we're gonna make sure we keep
No.
that going and speak to as many players as we can. And yeah, kind of keep telling the stories of what's going on, see what G6 does in the off season if they're gonna keep it around. So I think it'll
Yeah.
still be active after Friday's game. And then kind of just keeping a close eye on all the other teams. If some stay, some leave, go to other leagues, see how the
Mhm.
other leagues do, and kind of keep a close eye out on that. So one, I'll definitely take a break from the league, though. That's for sure. After
You've
this
earned it.
season,
Yeah.
after
You've
the
earned a
season,
well-deserved
yeah,
break. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Yeah, so probably I'll take a good break and then
Yeah.
just keep a close eye on in any new developments. So I think that's where I'm at now.
Awesome. Well, where can people follow along on all the socials?
Sure. We could do it at Arena Insider, my social media, A Carter underscore TV. This is inside the Arena side, but One Media X is my X1 Media. It's just the parent company that we just put out other stories. And so,
Okay.
yeah, you can give those a follow, arenainsider.com, the x1media.com, all of that. And yeah, on YouTube, we're on YouTube. So we're at Arena Insider on almost all the platforms. So you can check out the part one. That'll be premiere live on YouTube. Planning after the Arena Bowl. I'm not sure exactly what time.
Okay.
I know the game starts at 5:30, so I'm trying to level it up with the end of the
Yeah.
game and give that time to go through. So I'll say probably around 9 or 10 Eastern time, but I'll have an official date at sometime soon.
I got you. Well, you got the Arena Bowl leading into the documentary. What else could you
Yes.
ask for?
Yeah, you got to show people
Got to.
what kind of season it's been,
Right.
and kind of capping it off, and
Yeah.
just and see where it goes from there.
Yeah. Put a bow on it. Well, Anthony, I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by and talk shop a little bit. Yeah. Hope you have a little bit of fun at the Arena Bowl. The
Yes.
brawl at the mall is going to be an interesting experience to say the least. But
Ye-
yeah, take some time to try to enjoy a little bit of it.
Yeah, if you see me on camera eating an onions pretzel, just don't mind me, okay? Just
Yes,
let it
I
happen. If I have a lemonade in the other hand, just don't ignore me.
yeah,
Don't point it out. It's
yeah.
okay.
Don't meme them. Don't meme them,
I'm
guys.
trying to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
All right, Anthony.
yeah, that'll be good. Appreciate you for having me and all that you do also. So thank you.
Big thanks to Anthony for dropping in and hanging out with me and talking through the AFL season so far. I'm super excited to see the docu-series that he's putting together and see how that turns out and continuing to see the work that Arena Insider does within the AFL and beyond moving forward. So again, thank you, Anthony. Appreciate you and everything that you do for our arena football community. So we're entering the final week of the AFL season. This past weekend, we had two semifinal games in the playoffs that determined who would be playing in the Arena Bowl this week. So the two games that were played, there was the Salina Liberty at the Albany Firebirds, and then there was the Nashville Cats at the Billings Outlaws. So we'll talk about Salina versus Albany here first. And many people expected Albany to absolutely wash Salina in this game. But Salina was a sneaky good team, and I feel like they didn't get the credit that they deserved, and they came into this game. They weren't at full strength. That one of their star players, Tracy Brooks, did not play in this game, presumably to injury, but we don't know that for sure. But Charles McCollum is the quarterback for Salina, and he was able to make some plays. But I guess before we dive into this, I should probably tell you the score, right? So Albany did end up winning this game 80-59. 80-59. Extremely high scoring game. At halftime, this game was 42-40 or 44-42, something. It was a high scoring game. The first half was like an hour and a half long. It was crazy just due to all the stoppages, due to all the scoring that was happening from both teams. So it was a very highly entertaining game, one that I don't think very many people anticipated Salina keeping up with Albany the way that they did. And Charles McCollum, he was able to really sling the rock around. And he was able to complete 19 passes for 266 yards and 5 touchdowns. But the reason why this ended up being a 21-point game was because he also had 4 interceptions, was just entirely too many. Opening drive, he threw a pick. He ended up throwing 2 pick sixes. So you do some quick math here. 2 pick sixes, you take away 14 points. Suddenly, this is a 7-point game. And so Salina was there. They had the chance to win this game and steal this game from Albany, but they just made too many mistakes and shot themselves in the foot. But Salina looked good. They proved that they belonged in this league and they could play with the best. But if you're just looking at the scoreboard and the box score, that's not what this story tells. And that's a shame because Salina played really, really well, specifically in the first half and going blow for blow with Albany and kind of forcing Albany to keep up with them at times. But we're looking at the box score here. Caleb Smith, the wide receiver for Salina, he had 8 catches for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. The defense played pretty well. They were able to put some pressure on Albany and force them into a couple of mistakes on their own. But Salina, I think this was a great first season in the AFL. If they stay in the AFL, that would be great. I think they're a great organization with a great head coach and a great support system. Could potentially see them jumping ship to another league just because of how stuff in the AFL went down this past season. But Salina played really well in this game, and they gave themselves a chance to go to the Arena Bowl. Then on the other side, Albany played extremely well. I mean, they scored 80 points, so that's kind of a given, right? But starting at quarterback, Jake Medlock, he had a really solid game. He had a couple bad plays mixed in there, but for the most part, he played really well. He had 22 completions for 269 yards and 5 passing touchdowns. He did have 2 interceptions, but lucky for him, Salina had more. So it did more than just cancel it out. But Albany was able to be impactful on the ground as well. They ran the ball with Jake Madlock a handful of times. Isaiah Scott, wide receiver, he was able to get a handoff and run it in for a touchdown. They ran a tricky little play with Trayvon Shorts at running back, and he ended up getting a gain of 33 and a touchdown. So they were able to be pretty efficient running the ball as well at times in the second half. Darius Prince did his usual Darius Prince thing. He had 7 catches for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. Markel Wade, 3 catches for 32 yards and 2 touchdowns. Isaiah Scott, again, 6 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown. So they were able to spread the ball out amongst their receiving core. And they looked very good on offense, despite some of the pressure that Salina was able to bring at times. But Albany came into this game. I was fully expecting Albany to commit a lot of penalties just because that's typically what they've done over the second half of the season is commit double-digit penalties in a lot of their games. But they played a really clean game. It turned out it was Salina that had a lot of penalty issues in this game. So Albany played a pretty clean game up until the fourth quarter. They got a couple back-to-back penalties on a couple of plays, but Albany played really well on offense. They played really well on defense, and they just overpowered Salina towards the end and ran away with this one. So they punched their ticket to the Arena Bowl in New Jersey, and they did everything that they needed to do to get there. So big congratulations to the Albany Firebirds. And for the second game that kicked off at 10 p.m. Eastern, so we had a little AFL After Dark action. We had the Nashville Cats at the Billings Outlaws, and Billings ended up winning this game 35-32 on a walk-off field goal to end the game with no time left to send them to the Arena Bowl. It was quite a moment. Bailey Giffen just absolutely piped it down the middle. Especially in the AFL, that's a crazy situation to be in as a kicker because if you miss, it bounces off the net. The other team could potentially return it, and it could be a walk off the other way. So, but he looked unfazed. He looks cool as hell. He went out there. He kind of got iced by his own team in a way because they ended up calling a timeout, just kind of reset and make sure they were good to go. And he just absolutely crushed it. He crushed it from 39 yards out to seal the win right down the middle. So what a moment for Billings. And this was a really good game. And it was obviously much lower scoring than the other game. There was 139 total points scored in Salina, Albany. In this game, there was 67 total between the two teams. And this was a shutout in the first quarter. Like both teams were kind of feeling each other out. Defenses were really stepping up on for both teams. But Nashville, Randy Hippert was on absolute fire the last time these two teams played and last week against the Orlando Predators. Going into this game, I think he only had like 8 or 9 incomplete passes total, and he had close to 11 or 12 touchdowns through the air. And he was just playing absolutely lights out. But Billings found a way to neutralize him, which I thought they would. I didn't think they'd be able to neutralize him to the level that they did, but they ended up doing that. He ended the game 18 for 36 passing, so 50% passing completion percentage. And he did end up having 185 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he was still able to be impactful through the air. He's still able to spread the ball out amongst his receivers. Milton Williams, the third, 6 catches for 50 yards. Marquise Irvin, 5 catches for 53 yards and a touchdown. Braxton Haley had a really good day with 4 catches for 52 yards and a touchdown. So he was able to spread the ball out pretty well amongst his receiving core there. But Billings was able to make that extra play and really keep up with Nashville and keep it They were locking horns for the longest time here, but Billings was able to pull away with that game-winning field goal at the end. So Nashville, they had a chance to go down and tie it with just over a minute or right around a minute left in the game. And I would have thought they would have gone for two to take the lead and then go for the deuce, but they ended up kicking the extra point to tie it, then going for the deuce after that. So might look back and reconsider how that went down in hindsight. But in the moment, they ended up tying the game, and their defense was playing really well. So I don't blame them for doing that either. But on the Billings offense side, Isaac Harker, he ended up going 19 for 29 for 164 yards and 3 touchdowns. Hunter Swoboda, he had a pretty good game running the ball. He had 5 rushing attempts for 27 yards. And the big man, Blake Mitchell, he had an old school AFL moment where he's a defensive lineman, but he lined up at running back and they pitched him the ball and he ran the ball 9 yards for a touchdown. It was a majestic play. Love a good big man touchdown. And Arthur Anderson, the fourth, he ended up having 7 catches for 53 yards and a touchdown. Dwayne Brown, 6 catches for 53 yards, and Dallas Dixon, 5 catches for 57 yards and 2 touchdowns. So spread the ball out amongst his receivers as well. So this was a really well played game. And both of these games were really good showings for the AFL on the CBS Sports Network. And if you're the AFL so far, you have to be thrilled with the 4 games that have been played in the playoffs so far on CBS Sports. The Nashville Orlando game was ugly, but it was entertaining. Southwest Kansas and Salina was a very entertaining game. Albany Salina was a very high scoring back and forth game for the most part, and then this game was a defensive battle. So gotta love that how each of these games played out, and they were all entertaining for different reasons. But big congratulations to the Billings Outlaws for making it to the Arena Bowl. All right, so we've got ArenaBowl XXXIII at the American Dream Mall in New Jersey. It's going to be the Albany Firebirds versus the Billings Outlaws. So it's the final AFL game of the year. So who's going to win? What are we thinking? Where are we at? So here's my train of thought. Albany is the better offensive team. They have a lot more offensive weapons. Jake Medlock has been unbelievable. He's probably going to be up there for MVP. Darius Prince also probably going to be up there for MVP just because the impact that he's had on every single game that the Firebirds have played. But you look at Billings, they're a much better defensive team, and they were able to neutralize a white hot Randy Hippert and the Nashville Cats. And you look at the last time Albany and Billings played, Billings held Albany to 36 points. And Billings, as you if you didn't watch that game, go back and watch some highlights. It was quite a doozy, but that was it was a thrilling game in Billings where Billings came back and won by one with no time left or with a few seconds left. But it's going to be another really good game between these two. But I think Billings pulls it off yet again. I think Billings on offense. I just love what they bring to the table with their coaching staff. Cedric Walker, head coach, calling plays on defense, with Shedrick Bonner calling plays on offense. They look like a very traditional, old school AFL team. And that's how they play as well. They have players that play both ways. Albany does too, to an extent. And this is not taking anything away from Albany, but I have been on Billings as the best team in the AFL since week 2. You can go back and check the tapes, check the podcast, check the socials. I've been on Billings. I've loved the way Billings has played all year, and I'm going to stick with Billings and win in this game. In terms of final score, I'm probably going to be something like a 47-41, 48-42, somewhere in that range. I think Billings will be able to turn it up a little bit on offense and be able to put out a few more points than they did last time Albany played. But Albany is a very good team. They are fantastic on offense. Their defense is very opportunistic, and they can make game-changing plays as they did last week against Salina. But I really like this spot for Billings. I think Billings is the more complete team, but Albany is right there with them. So it's going to be a good game regardless of what happens. If I'm correct, I'll take a victory lap. If I'm incorrect, feel free to tap dance on my grave, Albany. I know you will. So yeah, it's going to be a fun game, and I'm excited to see how it's presented in that unique venue of the American Dream Mall and how they go about it. But it's going to be a fun one. It's going to be an interesting way to end an interesting season for the AFL. And that's the show. Thank you so much for checking it out. Thank you so much for stopping by, whether you're on YouTube, listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you're hearing my voice. I appreciate you dropping in and checking it out. If you can like, subscribe on YouTube, like, rate, all that stuff on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, that would be greatly appreciated. And give us a follow on all the socials. We've got Instagram, X/Twitter, and TikTok at Off the Wall FB, Off the Wall, F as in foot, B as in ball. Go give us a follow on each of those and come say hi. Love to mingle with some folks and see what we got going on in the arena and indoor football world. So we've got the AFL Arena Bowl this week. We've got week 19 of the IFL season that'll determine the final playoff seeding before the IFL playoffs start in a couple of weeks. So it's an exciting time in arena and indoor football, and excited for you to join along with me. So come by the socials, say hi. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the Arena Bowl. Enjoy IFL Week 19. We'll see you next week.